I will speak first about a brief history of trust. If you think about reputation and trust, they are sometimes interchangeable kind of words that people don't use really well. Reputation in the dictionary is defined as what people think about you. So it's something that you own, but is given to you by others. Trust, on the other hand, is something that you put on others. So it's an action, it's a verb, it's something that you put on others, and it depends on their reputation and many other variables. If you think about the beginning of trust, we can probably think about something that is very simple, like this. Who has seen this TV show before? Anyone? So a few people here in the UK will have seen it for sure. So this is the basis. This is called the prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, two players have two actions that they can do. They can either collaborate or they can defect. If they collaborate, they will split 50,000. They will get $50,000 each, 50,000 pounds. If they don't collaborate and both of them try to steal the money, they will get zero. But if one of them steals and the other one splits, one of them will take all the money. So what happens is that both have an incentive to defect. But if they could collaborate, they would both be happier in principle as an average. So you might remember this little, it was a very famous show, I think it was about 2 years ago, when the guy was telling her, come on, don't worry, we'll be fine, I'm sure I will split. She was like, oh no, I'm so worried, you will not split, you will steal, blah, 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 blah. And eventually she was the one stealing, right? So that's because, when you think about what was happening there, is that this is what is called a one-time game, a single-time game. Those two people are never going to speak again. It doesn't matter what happens later. They have no incentive to behave with each other. The way you solve this is with iterative games. So if they were going to work together in the future, even if they were going to play that game in the future, let's say over 10 times, they would do what's called tit for tat. So if you steal this time, I will steal to you next time. Over time, what happens is that people eventually collaborate. So what you want to avoid are single-time games. And what you want to have is multi-time games. You can think about this for almost anything, including wars, including the petrol industry, including almost anything. They become multi-time games or iterative games in order to avoid the incentive to defect. So imagine what would happen if this little lady, after stealing, she was punished by society. She could be punished in many ways. She could be punished by maybe not getting a job opportunity in the future because people don't trust her. Or she could be punished by her friends or by somebody. Or she could have, imagine, lower access to credit and the banker would not give her a mortgage. So imagine that situation where you are punished by society because you defect. That used to happen in primitive societies. In primitive societies, we were such a small group of people that we all knew each other. We knew each other so well that all of us had the incentive to behave with each other. As societies grow, we don't know each other anymore. So imagine this society, if this person is selling cheese to everyone else in the group, if that person sells one day a bad cheese or a bad meat or a bad product, everybody in the village is going to know very, very quickly. That person will be excluded from society very, very quickly. In our time, we don't know everyone else. We don't know all the people in our network. We don't know everyone, all the merchants, all the buyers and sellers in the ecosystem. So we use brands. And when I hire McKinsey, I don't need to know that particular consultant. I just have to trust the brand. I use that as a proxy for quality. I hope that even if the consultant is a one-time game, maybe I only hire them once, because McKinsey is a multi-time game that I might be able to hire over a long period of time, then that's going to drive the quality of the consultant. Or the same for a doctor. You probably want to have a doctor from Harvard because Harvard is giving that endorsement that this person is a good student or was a good doctor. So what we have are what we call the two variables or two dimensions for trust. One of them has to do with track record, which is what I mentioned earlier about the ancient societies or very clear networks of close networks where we know each other. It could be your families, it can be your friends, it can be those tribes. And when you have that track record, you build relationships, you have very high levels of trust. You can also have endorsement. And when you have endorsement, like you have the example of Harvard endorsing this person for being a good doctor, that's also a good level of quality of trust and quality of reputation. An even higher element would be Visa, or would be an insurance kind of player. Because even if I don't have money in my card, the moment I pay and Visa accepts it, the merchant knows that he will get paid. He will get paid, regardless of whether I have money or not in my account. So that's an even higher level of endorsement. When you have both, that's when you can have high-value transactions, like Goldman Sachs kind of private equity transactions. That's when you can have both a level of track record and high endorsement. That's what leads to super high-quality transactions and very expensive transactions. If you have read this book, The Physician, it's a beautiful book based in the 13th century, I think, where a little boy moves from London to Islamabad, and he goes village by village, hiding himself as a Jew, because that's what allowed him to be able to be accepted by each community and to be able to basically sleep for free in every town where he traveled through. This is important because, as I mentioned earlier, in those small groups, it was very easy to have reputation. But the moment one person gets excluded or needs to leave, the moment you step into a new community, you have no reputation. You start from zero. And starting from zero is really hard. That's the main problem of trust, is because then the first game you don't know if there's a multi-time game. You have a one-time game. And since you don't know how that's going how that first interaction is going to happen, you need to find a way to prove your trustworthiness, or to prove your reputation. And in the 13th century, that was not easy. In this book, he speaks a lot about why he hid himself as a Jew, because then he was accepted in every community as he traveled. Multi-time games are also the reason why you don't make your bed at a hotel, but you make your bed at an Airbnb. In a hotel, you have a one-time game. It doesn't matter. I mean, you live in whatever state, and you just paid, and you are not going to go back to that hotel. Or even if you do, it doesn't really affect you in any way. It doesn't affect your reputation. In Airbnb, it does. You care about how you live the place. You care about how you live the house, because there is going to be reputation at the end. And reputation leads to multi-time games. You want to be a good host. You want to be a good guest, so that you can apply to be the next guest in the future, and you can be accepted, or you can even increase your prices if you're a good host, because people will be more willing to take your house if they see that you have 5 stars. So, in principle, reputation or multi-time games create an incentive for good behavior. I would like to run a little game that we ran also in Singapore. I think it was quite interesting. I would like to ask you to think about this exercise. Imagine that we can travel with Anne in a BlaBlaCar. BlaBlaCar is a ride-sharing platform where we travel together from one city to another. Let's say that we can travel with Anne from New York to Washington for $11, and Anne has 5 stars and 42 reviews. Or we can travel with Beth, who is $8. It's a little bit cheaper, but she only has 3 stars and she had 3 reviews. Who would rather travel with Anne? Okay. Who would rather travel with Beth? Okay, a few people would travel with Beth. That's good. We had about 90% would travel with Anne. Okay, now let's say that we can now either travel with Beth or we can travel with Carol. Okay, Carol has exactly the same scores as Anne, but she's $16. Who would rather travel with Beth? Who would rather travel with Carol? Okay, a little bit more doubt, maybe 50-50 here. If I had said that Carol was $30, I'm pretty sure that I would be getting a lot more people towards Beth, right? So what we have here is what I would call a demand elasticity of reputation. Basically, we're changing price based on reputation. So what you're telling me is that you're willing to pay $3 for these 2 stars. That's what you're paying for. So in the same way that before we didn't have a good framework for what reputation is, and we said, well, it's what people think about me, or it's like I put my trust in somebody, now we have a mathematical approach to it, which is a derivative. It's a derivative of the price elasticity. So basically, reputation, what that means is that reputation is risk premium. It's those $3 that you were willing to pay extra. It's risk premium. It's exactly the same thing. Let's speak about networks of trust now. So the next step is how do you build networks? Epi was talking earlier about how social networks are about communication. The crowdsourcing space that we're seeing now of market networks are about productivity. This is where we get into productivity. Let's think about Homer, right? Imagine that in the world of insurance, there are already networks of trust, or what we could call networks of trust. When Homer endorses Bart to get his first insurance as an 18-year-old car driver, he's creating this. He's telling the insurance company that they have the same socioeconomic level, that they have an expected behavior that they can basically extrapolate from himself, and that this is an explicit endorsement. Now, this is a one-time connection from parents to children, and insurance companies already do this. Also, colleges, if you want to include, if you study in Harvard, you can recommend your son to Harvard, and Harvard is going to take that son as an expectation of high quality of academic performance and all that. All of that is a network of trust of just one-to-one. The thing is that today we have multiple connections. In fact, we have thousands of connections. And all of those can come from many different transactions that we're making all the time. It can include the sharing economy that we mentioned earlier, like the Airbnbs of this world. It can be peer-to-peer car renting. It can be almost anything. And it can all be extrapolated to anything else, like pet caring, but even mortgages. Why not? There might be a point at which you use all that reputation that you're gathering and use that for your mortgage, for the most important transaction that you make in your life. So this is what I feel will be the network of trust. And I will give you a very clear example that you will all understand. Mohammed Yunus, when you think about what he actually did from an academic and economic framework point of view, is he was giving microcredits to women in Bangladesh who had no collateral. No collateral means absolutely no collateral. This was for very small transactions, like very small credits, like $30, $40, to buy a bicycle, to be able to go to the market and sell whatever fruits or whatever. The network was the collateral. What he was looking for were women who had been in that community for 20 years, and they had a group of friends, a network of people who would endorse her. The reason for that was that if that person would not return the money or would not return the credit, all those friends in the community, the interest rate would increase for all of them. This is a very simplistic approach to it, but in principle, the interest rate increases for all of them. So what we have is not only the reputation of that person was at stake, like it is in our society, typically with a credit score, where if we don't return the money, our credit score goes down, or we can be in a blacklist, etc. This is more fundamental. The pain was going to be for her friends. The pain was going to be shared with the network. The interest rates would increase for everyone else. So they have a much stronger peer incentive to behave. Or the Amish in Philadelphia. These people, for religious reasons, they cannot buy insurance. They're not allowed to buy insurance. But what they have is what you could call a post-insurance. So if somebody had an illness, like a cancer, everyone after that cancer happens, after, it's not insurance, it's after, they all pitch in to pay for that illness, all of them. And if one of them doesn't, that person gets excluded from the community. Again, tremendous peer pressure to behave in that society. This is a company in Germany called Friendsurance, where you create a group of friends and you buy car insurance. If one of you has a crash or kind of makes a claim, it increases it increases the premium for all your friends. So again, maybe the little itchy that you had in your car and that you were going to claim, now you don't want to claim it. Because it's not only for your own premium, it's for the premium of your friends. You have a much stronger incentive. So when we think about this punishment that we were talking about before, now we can think about the network of trust in a much more fundamental way. Because what if this action was not only affecting her as a punishment, it was affecting her friend's access to credit, like in the case of the Mohammed Yunus, it's exactly the same case. Or your friend's access to job opportunities. It could happen. That doesn't only punish us, it elevates us. We have a much stronger incentive in what you could call is a more moral kind of action, or more ethical, or even, what I call here is moral elevation. So we all have a higher incentive to behave for the goodness of my friends. It can also be selfish, of course. It can also be selfish because I want to keep my friends. But it doesn't affect you so much. So you're actually doing those actions for the good of your network. To speak very quickly about Traity, this is not to talk about Traity, but just to give you some context, what we do is to aggregate all this information that is social and what we call that network of trust, for which we recently got a patent actually, to build that kind of global score of who you are. The idea is that in the future, you can use that score for all sorts of transactions, like we mentioned earlier, especially for that first game that you make in a new place or when you move to a new country. When you think about that, at the fundamental level, I started Traity because back 3 years ago, I was living here in the UK, and I made a transaction on Gumtree, and I got robbed. So I paid $250 for a second-hand laptop, and I never got the laptop, and I was like very frustrated by that situation. And I started to think about why that was a problem. Why was it happening? Why had they been so stupid as well? But we had asymmetric information and asymmetric transactions. On top of that, we built individual reputation, which is what happens on eBay and Airbnb and yada. What I'm talking about is that network of trust, which is a higher level of incentives, a much higher level of incentives. In fact, it can be so high that it can be dangerous. In the case of Mohammed Yunus, there are examples of women who have committed suicide because of that peer pressure. So we have to be also careful of what we're doing. What I'm saying is it's a much higher level of elevation of trust. We start with the peer-to-peer online. Then we move to insurance. I spoke about insurance a couple of times because it's a very clear example of how networks of trust already operate, like the case of Homer and Bart, but also how they will operate in the future. In fact, we are now, we'll be announcing very soon a partnership with one of the largest insurance companies in the world that they're going to start to use the Traity reputation to decrease the premiums of people, the actual premiums of people. This is a very fundamental change in how insurance works. And in the future, it might become the credit score. Your credit score across countries, an international credit score. And I will give you a few examples for that. International trade, maybe it's not so interesting. Home deposits and guarantors. I moved to the US about 6 months ago. And when I moved to the US, I didn't have a credit score because I was just moving there. The landlord requested me to pay $14,000 of deposit just to move in. My company was able to pay for that. But a normal person, we're talking here about limiting tremendously the access to change, to access the ability to move to a new country, the ability to move to a new place to have a better life. Because typically when you move to a new country, it's because you're going to get a better job or because you're expecting a better life. So we're limiting that tremendously. Or guarantors. This same landlord requested me to pay, not to pay, but to have a guarantor worth $40,000 worth of liability. I was lucky to be able to have a friend who had been in the US for many years and had a very good credit score, and that person took that liability for me. But we are talking here of, not many people can take that liability. What if we could use networks of trust and say, hey, I have a great reputation in Spain, and I'm moving here, but I'm not a bad person. I just don't have a credit score here. Why can I not use this international form of credit, this international form of scoring? But not only that as a score, what about a guarantor? Why do I have to have one guarantor worth $40,000? Why couldn't I have a network of potentially 100 guarantors, crowdsource guarantors, who put a liability of $400 each on themselves? And I pay them, maybe I pay them $30 per month for that benefit. You could create a crowdsourced form of guarantors, a guarantor network. It's a trust network in a way, but putting money behind. And that's actually what we're building now. So it's a bit of a secret, but we're building that now to put basically behind the network of trust money behind it. Tenant applications is actually very similar to what I mentioned before. In Berlin, for every house that is on the market, there are maybe 25 applications, probably in London as well. People show up to those application meetings with their suits and looking really, really serious because it's very difficult to get the house. And maybe you should have a form of network of trust to be able to say, I'm a good tenant. I don't have to show off. I'm just a good person. Immigrants and young people credit scores, what I just mentioned. Mortgages, as I said, there is a form of, I think that Epi and Chris were talking about mortgages before and how that will change in the future in a crowdsourced form. There are networks of trust that would help that to happen. Because if you have, for example, your landlord recommending you as a good tenant for the last 10 years and you were paying $1,000 worth of rent every month, maybe you can also pay a mortgage worth $1,000 per month. It was not a credit liability, but it was a contract liability, and you were paying that on time. Why cannot we use that form of reputation for our mortgages or to prove that we are creditworthy? Unemployment, there are a few startups that are working on this, very interesting. Imagine a group of people where we decide to insure each other against unemployment. So if I lose my job, then you all pay me. Okay? We're 10 people, and I lose my job, you 9 pay for my unemployment benefits for the next few months. It creates two incentives. First of all, it's a much stronger incentive for me to find a job than having the government pay for it. Much stronger because I'm hurting my friends. You also have a much stronger incentive to find me a job, to help me find a job. Because if I tell my friends I lost my job, they will say, oh, I'm sorry, Juan. But if they are paying for it, they will probably be looking for a job for me very, very quickly. So those networks of trust, they create incentives in both directions. Online transactions we just mentioned, and job and college recommendation is pretty much the same for what I said about recommending to Harvard or etc. What if you could use much stronger forms of reputation that doesn't have to come from one single person, but from a whole network? That's pretty much it. We have been working on this for the last 3 years, but the network of trust is I believe it's much stronger form of reputation than individual reputation itself. It's much more resilient as a form of trust. There are very few companies in the world who are taking advantage of that as of today. But as I said, with those insurance companies are starting to move in that direction, banking will do too, and we'll see what other business models come out of that. So with this, thank you for everything, and if you have any questions.